Good morning, everybody. I hope you all had a great week last week. I hope you had a great weekend. I'm here with your week 4 civics assignment. We're going to be looking at levels of government. Okay, so we've looked at the 3 branches of the federal government. We've looked at the judicial last week, the legislative, and the executive. Okay, so we've gone really in depth. But the thing is that's the federal government. And we know that there's different levels of government, and that's what we're going to look at this week. Okay, so you have federal government, you have state government, and you have local government. There's different levels of them because we know that the federal government too busy to be handling state and local issues on every issue. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at this week. Last week's video was longer than I wanted it to be, so I'm going to get right into it here. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to pull up your assignment. If you look here, right, and I'm in A block because it's just the first one to pop up. You go into classwork, okay? And if we look at our week 4 assignment, you will see there's a few attachments here, okay? So this right here is your notes for the week. And this is, again, where you guys are going to upload your assignment to, just like always, attach it here. There's 3 documents that I will pull up. I'm only going to pull up the first 2 for right now, so we're going to get right into the notes. And say, there we go. Levels of government. Here we go. Get excited. And it's loading. All right. So the levels of government. We have the highest level of government is our federal government. Okay, AKA national government, AKA central government. You're going to hear those words thrown around, and they all mean the same thing. The federal government, the national government, or the central government. That's all the same thing. It is all the highest ranking level of government. Then we have our state government, and then we have our local government. Okay, so again, here's a chart just to show you guys how that flows. Now, the separation between state government and federal government is outlined by the 10th Amendment, which says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So that's where we get this divide. Okay, the 10th Amendment outlines the fact that anything not specifically delegated to the federal government is the job of the state to handle. Okay, and we know from earlier in the year when we were talking about our guards against tyranny that federalism is one of them. And what is federalism? This is one of your questions this week. Federalism is the division of power between the federal and state government. Okay, so this whole division of power, we have levels of government, okay, and the division of power between federal and state government is called federalism. Okay, so there's one of your answers for the week. Here's another nice little catchy graphic that shows federalism. We have national government, which is representative of the whole country. We have state, and then you have local, which is much, much, much smaller, and we're going to get into that in a second. So the federal system, we look at powers that are reserved to the states, like taxing citizens, controlling public education, punishing criminals, protecting public health and safety, conducting elections, establishing local governments, making marriage laws. And then you have powers of the national government, which are levying tariffs and taxes, regulating trade, coining money, maintaining an armed forces, our military, declaring war, establishing the post office, and establishing courts. Okay. Now, if you notice, the state powers are much smaller, much more, intimate and personal things like marriage laws, much smaller. Okay, that's a state by state thing that they're able to make these laws. Okay. And if you notice, conducting elections is in here. The elections serve the national government. We elect national leaders like the president, like, members of the Senate. But what happens is that these are done on a state level. Now, concurrent powers, another one of your questions here, means powers combined, powers that both of them have, okay? And that is maintaining law and order, levying taxes, borrowing money, taking lands for public use, and providing for the public welfare. These are the jobs of both sides. Okay. That's another chart right there for you guys. So in federalism and the national government, you have the highest ranking spots up here. You have Congress, the president, federal courts, the national government agencies. And then in state government, you have state elected officials, state government agencies, and then locally elected and appointed leaders and city salaried officials at the local level. Okay, so why divide the power? Why is federalism important? Why is it important that the federal government doesn't control absolutely everything, that they're able to divide the power a little bit? So the answer that I give here is that our nation's founders, specifically the gentleman who drafted the Constitution, their concern over tyranny leads directly to the separation of power among the three branches of government, but also to further divide that power between state and federal governments. It's another guard against tyranny. So we know one of the guards is that they separate the power into three branches. You have the judicial, the executive, and the legislative. They share power, and they can check each other's power and through checks and balances. But now we also have a further layer to it, that the power is divided between state and federal government, so that not just the federal government has all the power and the states don't have all the power. There's a balance here, okay? And the balance is important. This way, the federal government doesn't have complete control over the states, and the states have no say. But it also makes it so the states are not completely ignoring the authority of the federal government. They share the powers. And again, the state powers are more personal, okay? Are dealing with things like marriage laws, driver's licenses, different things like that. Laws that are smaller scale and more important to us on a daily basis. So, quick history lesson. You guys will learn more about it next year with me in Global One. But when you look at the balance of power between state and federalism, it's so important because after the American Revolution and we win our freedom from Great Britain, our independence, the first thing that they try, the first form of government is called the Articles of Confederation. You guys should be familiar with that. And under the Articles of Confederation, the federal government had like no power. The states had all of the power. So the government looking to make money could ask the states for taxes. They could be like, hey, listen, Massachusetts, we need that tax money that you've been collecting. And Massachusetts could literally just say no. Sorry, don't have it, not paying it. Okay? The states had more power. The only thing that the federal government really had the power to do at that time was to declare war. Okay? But you also can't have it the other way. You can't have the federal government giving the states no power and telling them absolutely everything, making their marriage laws, making their education laws, okay? Making these small scale laws that are left to the states and to the towns, okay? So you can't have the states having all the power, but you also can't have the federal government having all of it either. That's why federalism is very important. So the powers not granted to the federal government are reserved for the states and the people, as outlined in the 10th Amendment. Most Americans have more daily contact with their state and local governments than with the federal, okay? Things like police departments, libraries, schools, your driver's license, parking tickets, these fall under state and local government. Each state has its own written constitution, and these are often very different than the federal because each state has sort of different needs that it needs to meet, okay? So the constitutions are inevitably gonna look different. Okay, and the example here, the Alabama Constitution has 310,000 words. It's 40 times as many words as the US Constitution. Okay, the oldest constitution still in use is Massachusetts, which was written in 1780, 9 years before the US Constitution. Okay, under the 10th Amendment, as we went over, powers not granted to the federal government are reserved to the states. All state governments are modeled after the federal government and consist of three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. Okay? The Constitution mandates all states uphold a Republican form of government. Okay? So that gets into the fact that like the states can't just have their own form of government. Okay? They have to have a certain Republican form. They cannot have, say, a communist government, okay? They cannot have a dictatorship. These are things they can't have. It has to be a Republican form. They are not required, interestingly enough, to have a three-branch structure. Most do, but they're not required to have it. I found that very interesting. Okay, Massachusetts has three branches, just like our federal government. State and local governments are made up of governors, mayors, state representatives, city council members, and sheriffs, okay? Power is also divided by level, with each layer performing its designated responsibilities. States and communities even have the freedom to design their own institution and create their own offices. The organization of state and local government varies widely across the United States. They have common specific features, but their organizations differ. Regardless of design, state and local governments often have a far greater impact on people's lives than the federal government. We deal more with state and local government than we do with federal. Marriage, birth, and death certificates, school policies, driving age and qualifications to get a license, laws regarding theft, rape, murder, as well as primary responsibility of protecting citizens from criminals. That falls to the states. These critical issues and many others are not decided by distant Washington authorities, but by state and local leaders. So Massachusetts, the three levels of Massachusetts government. First, the executive branch. Massachusetts their executive branch is led by a governor. Massachusetts governor, right here, this gentleman here is Charlie Baker. I'm sure you've seen him on the news a lot lately with the pandemic going on. He's there every day. His lieutenant governor, his second in command, is Karen Polito. Every state, the governor is chosen by popular vote, and most serve a 4-year term. More than half the states put limits on the number of times an individual may be elected. We call those term limits, obviously. And in most states, several other top officials are elected. In general, governors have the authority to issue executive orders, prepare the state budget, make appointments, veto legislation, and to grant pardons to criminals. Very similar to what position in the executive branch that we've learned about? President. Good. The legislative branch. So each state has a bicameral or two-house legislature. We learned about that last week, except for Nebraska, which only has a unicameral body, which is one house. Strange. I don't know why Nebraska has that. I didn't look into that. Maybe I should. State legislatures vary in size from 20 to 400, and not necessarily in proportion to the size of the state's population. Like New Hampshire, for example, has 400 members in its lower house, which is kind of surprising because we have 435 for the national government. In New Hampshire, pretty small state, has 400 in its lower house. Strange. All states have guidelines for age, residency, compensation, and most legislators meet in annual sessions. Just as in the national legislature, many state legislators serve several terms, creating a large body of professional politicians in the United States. So you have our House of Representatives and our Senate in the federal legislative branch, and then you have a pretty big body of state legislatures, okay? In Massachusetts, the legislature was formerly called the General Court. It is a bicameral, two-chamber legislative body consisting of a Senate of 40 members and a House of Representatives of 160. That's from mass.gov, okay? The Massachusetts judicial branch. Now, last week we talked about the judicial branch, and we did touch on state courts. A number of us missed that question. There is more chance for appeal through state courts. There's more steps on the ladder, okay, to appeal. In the federal court, it's much more fast-tracked. And to be in a federal court, you have to have been accused of committing a federal crime. Okay, so if, say, for instance, you break a law that is a law in Uxbridge, you would go to a local court. If it's not a federal law, you would not be able to take that to a federal court system. Each state has its own court system, and most states have a state Supreme Court. Now, the important thing here that I forgot to just mention is the Mass judicial branch interprets state laws, okay? They're not concerned so much with federal law, they're concerned with interpreting state laws, because Massachusetts has some laws that are different than federal laws, okay? Most state judges have the final voice in the vast majority of cases in the United States, since more come under state rather than federal jurisdiction. Most states have two types of courts: trial courts. Those are courts that handle issues from traffic fines, divorce settlements, to murder. And appeals courts, courts that hear cases appealed from lower courts. State constitutions, we talked about these before. Each state can have its own constitution. States had constitutions years before the U.S. Constitution was written. Massachusetts, for one of them, was 9 years before. Since the Declaration of Independence, states have written about 150 constitutions, with several states writing new ones frequently, so they change them. State constitutions tend to be longer than the national one, on average 4 times longer, because they're more specific. As a result, they are often heavily amended and rather easily tossed out, at least in some states. And state constitutions determine the structure, role, and financing of state and local levels of government. Now, I got a couple graphics here to close things up. This is the Massachusetts State House located in Boston, the nice gold dome here. I went here when I was in high school. We had a dinner there, our baseball team. We had a nice dinner at the State House, which was pretty cool. fun fact. We have a judicial branch, an executive branch, and a legislative branch here in Massachusetts. The judicial branch interprets state laws. The executive branch is headed by the governor, and the lieutenant governor is the second in command. And the legislative branch is made up of the Senate and the House in Massachusetts. Okay, there's another nice picture of the State House in Boston for you. And here's another chart. It broke things down pretty easily. I really like this. It shows the powers of the government in each branch at each level. Okay, so in the federal government, you have Congress as the head of the legislative branch, President is the head of the executive branch, and the Supreme and federal courts make up the judicial branch. Whereas in the state government, state legislator makes up the legislative branch, the governor heads the executive branch, and our state courts head up the judicial branch. Okay, and same for local. The city council makes up your legislative branch. The mayor is the head of the executive branch at a local level, and your local courts make up the judicial branch at a local level. All right, so let's get into this week's assignment. This week's assignment has a number of questions for you. I've laid it out very similar to the last few weeks. After reviewing and looking deeper at all three branches, we can now look at our next steps. Legislative and judicial branches, legislative, executive, and judicial branches have all been explored at the national level. The highest level is where we've looked at these branches. So that means for us and Massachusetts and Uxbridge specifically, what does that mean? We have more personal levels, our state and local levels, okay? And they all connect and relate. So this week, we're going to look at the different levels of government, federal, state, and local, and the division of power between them, which is federalism. Federalism is the division of power between state and federal government. Okay, we've spent a lot of time focusing on the federal government, so this week we learn a little bit more about the state government and how they interact. Okay, so this right here will be a video of the walkthrough that I'm making right now. We also have two videos for you here. Okay, actually there's only one video this week. I'm sorry, it's a Khan Academy video. It's only 6 minutes long. It's very short. It goes over a lot of the stuff that I just went over, but it's a little bit dry. I will admit it's a little bit dry, but the information is good and it really reinforces a lot of the stuff that I just talked about, fills in a couple gaps. I also have the slideshow that I made right here for you guys, okay, for you guys to go back, get some answers. For this week's assignment, same style of assignment where I ask you some short answer questions and then some open response ones, but I want you guys to start getting a little bit more creative, okay? What does that mean? Try answering the questions in a different form than just a Google Doc. Jazz it up a little bit. Put them in a Google slide. Make a video of you responding to these, you telling me what is federalism? What does the 10th Amendment mean? What does it do? Okay? Take it to the next level. Okay, I'm sure you're all bored of writing down answers to questions. I'm bored of just reading the answers to the questions. I would like to see you guys interact with the assignments a little bit more. Should you have the time, okay, should you have the time. Now, if you are just writing out the answers, I would like to see us sort of take the next step with answering these. I go through a good number of these where it's just a very quick little answer, okay? Give me a little bit more. Tell me about it. What do you think is the most important branch last week? The legislative branch, because they make the laws. Okay. Why is that more important than the judicial or the executive branch? Add a little more to it. Give some detail to show that you know what you're talking about. Okay. So you have 4 short answer questions here, and then you have 3 that expand on this question right here. Exclusive and concurrent powers. Okay. You're going to find out what those mean, and then you're going to answer. What are 3 exclusive powers of the national government? What are 3 exclusive powers of the state government? If you look early on in your slideshow, right up here, you will be able to find exclusive and concurrent powers. Okay, so a little spoiler alert there, points you guys in the right direction. And lastly, what are 3 concurrent powers of both national and state government? Okay, now the meat of the assignment this week, the open response questions. There's 3 of them here. The 3 questions are, why would the framers of the Constitution have been so concerned with making sure that power was divided between the federal and the state government? Why is that a problem? I know they want to avoid tyranny. Expand on that a little bit. Again, if you go into your notes, I have a slide up here, right here. Why divide the power? Why is federalism so important? Okay. Governor Baker is the governor of Massachusetts. What do governors do? So you're going to come in here, you're going to find your slide here with Charlie Baker, the executive branch. What does he do? Okay, tell us about him. Tell us about what his job is. Okay. Question 3, why is the balance between national, state, and local government so important during this pandemic? This is a very good question. Okay. If you've been watching some of the things on the news, some of the press conferences, our president is leaving it up to the states to declare when they are able to reopen. This federal government is offering guidance on this, but each state is handling this situation differently. Many of them are handling it similarly, but they are all handling it differently. For instance, some states have reopened some businesses. Florida has reopened beaches. Okay, not the case in Massachusetts. So why is the balance between national, state, and local government so important during this pandemic? Should the national government, the federal government, our president, should he be telling every state what to do? Or is that power left to the states? Do the states know what's best for them? Okay, so I want you to really think about that one. That's a good question right there. I really like that question. Okay, and then at the end of it, sort of tying off of this, at a press conference last week, there is an article right here. This is a link to the article. And the article is taken from NPR. Okay, this is a link right here to the actual article. It's only a little more than 2 pages long, but the title I gave it here is, does the President of the United States have total authority over everything? Does he? I want you to read through the article, and that will help you answer question number 4. Does the president have total authority? Does he have the authority to order states to reopen? So these 2 questions are pretty similar. This one focuses more on the president, okay? So during this pandemic, there is a delicate balance between what the federal government is able to do, say, and provide, and what the states themselves are doing. Okay, the states are acting under the guidance of the federal government, but the federal government has not come in and done a nationwide lockdown. They have not required all states to do that. They're leaving that call up to the states, okay, because the states have a better idea of what their state needs. Okay, guys like Charlie Baker, he's making that call, the governors. Okay, so why is that so important at this time? Okay. And then lastly, your question here on the president. Does the president have total authority over the states? Does federalism come in here? That balance to avoid one person having all of the power and calling all the shots? Okay. Why is that important? Should the president be able to have total authority and tell the states and local governments exactly what to do? Or is that power to be left to the state and local leaders? Okay. So I'm very, very interested to see what you guys had to say. I hope that I kept this a little bit quicker. When you guys are done, there was a lot to go over there, so I apologize if this was long as well. I will work at getting these down. I'll try anyway. But it was a lot to go over. But when you're done, upload it here. And don't forget, try and get creative this week with it. Make your answers into a slideshow. Make them into a video where you use a flip grid or just record it and go through the answers. This is what federalism is. I don't think that, the president should have total power, because if the president has total power over everybody in the country, that leads to, a potentially tyrannical situation. Or yes, the president should have total authority in this case, because we're in a global pandemic and these states need to be told what to do. They need to be told if they need to shut down. So he needs to have total authority. Or on the other hand, again, no, it goes against the Constitution, the division of power, the separation of power between your branches of government and the state and local government and federal government, okay? I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. I miss you guys, and I will see you hopefully tomorrow in Zoom class. All right, hope you all have a good week. Bye.